My name is Jeff Morgan. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I'm going to be speaking on House Bill 575. This is a bill for grandparent access and visitation rights. One of the things I want to speak about first is the group that will be opposing it. One of the main groups that opposes this bill is not the Texas Family Law Foundation, which is pretty amazing because in most things they are completely anti-family and they destroy the family. I actually think that they have a reason for supporting grandparent rights. I think it's so that they can increase litigation and collect some money off of it, but that's neither here nor there. At least as a broken clock is right twice every day, so the Texas Family Law Foundation is actually right on the side of the issue. But the organization I want to speak about is a Texas Homeschool Coalition. Now, the Texas Homeschool Coalition, they purportedly are a Christian homeschooling organization, and they stand for parental rights. And in their pursuit to defend parental rights, they have also put out videos and sometimes testimony that has vilified grandparents. What is it really that the Texas Homeschool Coalition finds so offensive about grandparents being involved in grandchildren's lives? After all, if they were a Christian organization, they would look at what the Bible would say. In Genesis chapter 31, Laban is chiding Jacob for leaving, and what he said was this: "Why did you slip away from me secretly? Why did you steal away? And why didn't you say you wanted to leave? I would have given you a farewell feast with singing and music, accompanied by tambourines and harps. Why didn't you let me kiss my daughters and grandchildren and tell them goodbye? You have acted very foolishly by not letting me kiss my children and my grandchildren." And if you are a Christian and if you are keeping the grandchildren away from their grandparents, you are acting very foolishly. Deuteronomy chapter 4 even says this: "What great nation has decrees and regulations as righteous and fair is this body of instructions that I am giving you today?" And this is Moses speaking to Israel. "But watch out. Be careful never to forget what you have seen. Do not let these memories escape from your mind as long as you live, and be sure to pass them to your children and grandchildren." So Moses is given the book of the law the second time. Deuteronomy, it's the second law. He's giving it to them a second time. And what he says is this. This is one of the opening phrases to the presentation of what God has done with this organization. "Be careful never to forget what you yourself have seen. Do not let these memories escape from your mind as long as you live, and be sure to pass them on to your children and to your grandchildren." So a scriptural approach to the family would include not just the father, mother, son and daughter relationship, but it would also include the grandparents. The grandparents have a very special role according to scripture to teach not just their children, but their grandchildren. Moses continues in Deuteronomy chapter 6 by saying this: "These are the commands, decrees, and regulations that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you. You must obey them in the land you are about to enter and occupy, and you and your children and grandchildren, must fear the Lord your God as long as you live. If you obey all of his decrees and commands, you will enjoy a long life." So once again, Moses is talking not just about parents and children, he's talking about grandparents and children and grandchildren. This is a true Christian perspective. The perspective that the Texas Homeschool Coalition has is a warped biblical perspective. It's actually an anti-biblical perspective. They want to exclude grandparents in many instances, and I'll get back to the reason why in a few moments, but all I'm saying is that the Texas Homeschool Coalition is teaching an anti-biblical position on the family and on the role of grandparents. The book of Job says this about Job. After all of his trials and things that had happened in his life, Job lived 140 years after that, living to see 4 generations of children and grandchildren. Then he died, an old man who had lived a long, full life. Once again, in the plan of God, it is to be able to see not just your children, but your grandchildren as well. And by the way, this is a two-way thing. Grandchildren love their grandparents. They want to be with their grandparents. A true biblical perspective, a true biblical viewpoint would say grandparents are important. The Texas Homeschool Coalition, and Tim Lambert in particular, do not adhere to a biblical framework for the family. Psalm 128 verses 5 through 6 says, "May the Lord continually bless you from Zion. May you see Jerusalem prosper as long as you live. May you enjoy your grandchildren. May Israel have peace." This is a blessing that is being invoked upon the people of Israel. May you live to enjoy your grandchildren. Again, a true biblical framework says that it's not just the parents and the children. The grandparents are part of this whole family dynamic. I had been a missionary to the Middle East, and I saw this in many instances in which you had a family who built a home, and if a son would go to and marry and bring somebody and get a wife, what they would often do would be to build another layer on their house, so that you would have not just the parents on the bottom and the children, but so that the grandparents would be there when grandchildren were born. That is the more biblical culture. The grandparents have a very special role, an important role, an integral role in the lives of their grandchildren. The Texas Homeschool Coalition says that they don't. They often vilify grandparents instead. The Texas Homeschool Coalition, in spite of its proclamation of being a Christian organization, is very anti-biblical and anti-Christian in their portrayal of grandparents. Proverbs 17 verse 6 says, "Grandchildren are the crowning glory of the aged. Parents are the pride of their children." And once again, this is something from Old Testament teaching that, grandchildren are the crowning glory of the aged. You talk with grandparents, and what do they talk about? Do they talk about their children? No, they talk about their grandchildren. How much they love them, how proud they are of them, how some grandparents get Facebook. Why? So that they can watch their grandchildren grow. They may not be near their lives right now, but just please keep sending us pictures of our grandchildren. They are the pride of the aged. Jeremiah 29 says this, "This is what the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says to all the captives he has exiled to Babylon from Jerusalem. Build homes and plan to stay. Plant gardens and eat the fruit they produce. Eat the food they produce. Marry and have children. Then find spouses for them so that you may have grandchildren. Multiply. Do not dwindle away. And work for the peace and prosperity of the city where I sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, for its welfare will determine your welfare." Again, these are people that had been exiled by God, and God is saying to these people, pray for the good of the city, marry, have children, find them spouses. Why? So that they may have many grandchildren. Multiply, do not dwindle away. Work for the prosperity and peace of the city where I sent you into exile. There are often instances where grandparents will do much more for their grandchildren than they ever did for their children, because that is how much their grandchildren mean to the grandparents. Any type of a viewpoint that says grandparents are not important or grandparents should be excluded from a grandchildren's life is an anti-biblical perspective. I will even say it's an anti-biblical heresy, even if it comes from the Texas Homeschool Coalition, which purports to be a Christian organization. Ezekiel 37 verses 24 through 26 say this, "My servant David will be their king, and they will have only one shepherd. They will obey my regulations and be careful to keep my decrees. They will live in the land I gave to my servant Jacob, the land where their ancestors lived. They and their children and their grandchildren after them will live there forever, generation after generation. And my servant David will be their prince forever, and I will make a covenant of peace with them, an everlasting covenant. I will give them their land and increase their numbers, and I will put my temple among them forever." Once again, in the plan of God, he's talking about not just parents and children. He says grandchildren. They and their children and their grandchildren after them will live there forever, generation after generation. Once again, this is a biblical viewpoint of the role of grandparents and how important they are in the plan of God. The Texas Homeschool Foundation Coalition and Tim Lambert have an anti-biblical viewpoint of the role and the importance of grandparents. Finally, one final verse to bring this subject to a close, and this is from 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 3 through 4. "Take care of any widow who has no one else to care for her. But if she has children or grandchildren, Their first responsibility is to show godliness at home and repay their parents by taking care of them. This is something that pleases God. So when you have a properly functioning family that pleases God, it includes not just the parents and the children, it includes the grandparents and the grandchildren. This is a biblical viewpoint, that you would actually have a family that would, to please God, would have grandparents who are the parents of the children and who are the grandparents of the grandchildren. This is what a biblical viewpoint is. The Texas Homeschool Coalition will be one of the organizations that will be testifying against House Bill 575, a bill that would actually enable grandparents to be more to have access to their grandchildren's lives. And the Texas Homeschool Coalition will talk about parental rights. We need to talk about parental rights. Parental rights to the Texas Homeschool Coalition means this. It means they want a parent to be able to homeschool their children without any supervision, without any monitoring, not from the state, not from anybody else, and certainly not from extended family members. The Texas Homeschool Coalition has an objective. They want people to homeschool. They want to homeschool people and sell them their materials and everything else. And then they talk about how homeschooling is such a big right. You're asserting your parental rights to do this. In reality, the goal of the Texas Homeschool Coalition is to have unsupervised, unmonitored homeschooling. And invoking parental rights is the means by which they are seeking to get this into place. And let me say something first about homeschooling. I, as well, we homeschooled our kids. We did not homeschool them the entire time, but all of our children were homeschooled. I am very familiar with the homeschooling movement. We homeschooled up in Washington State, and we homeschooled overseas. In Washington State, in order to homeschool, you had to have some person with a bachelor's degree in the family. I was a person with a bachelor's degree. I don't know what the current status of that isn't right now in Washington State, but it was something that they wanted to make sure that children would not be neglected through homeschooling. And for the most part, actually, homeschoolers do quite well compared to their peers in the public schools. However, what the Texas Homeschool Coalition is trying to do is state that there should be no type of safety net in there for the children or the grandchildren. I will address this much more in this upcoming video with a letter from a former very famous homeschooler, that she wrote to me regarding the homeschool situation and why the Texas Homeschool Coalition needs to be opposed in their quest to deny grandparents access and visitation rights. Thank you.